Trigger warning. In this episode, we will be discussing potentially triggering subject matter, specifically suicide in the context of racial isolation. When we get to that section, there will be another warning and directions on how to skip that section and listen to the rest of the episode, which contains advice on how to overcome racial isolation and positive topics like solidarity and joy. It's not enough to survive in this racialized world. We are learning together to sur-thrive. This is Race, Health, and Happiness, and I am your host, Dr. O. Today, my guest is Naki Osutei. She's an African-born Canadian woman, and she is the Vice President of Strategy, Colleague Experience, and Environmental Social Governance for TD Canada. In 2017, she helped to develop the TD Ready Commitment, the bank's global corporate citizenship platform, which provides grants to organizations, in particular, community groups doing impactful work. At TD, she co-chairs the Black Employee Network and is a member of the Black Executive Steering Committee. Naki has worked with organizations like Civic Action and the Toronto 2015 Pan Am and Para-Pan Am Games and CIBC to create leadership, career development, and executive talent strategies that advance diversity and inclusion. She is also the founder of Next Level Presence, a boutique coaching consultancy which produces the podcast Presence by Naki O. And in 2021, she was appointed Executive in Residence at Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto. Naki, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. O. So it's Dr. O and Naki O in the house. I love it.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I had not thought about that. Naki O and Dr. O, y'all better watch out now. All right. So on this show, the first question I ask all of my guests, because I'm always curious and I think it kind of sets the tone, is what is your superpower?
Ooh, yes. I would say my superpower is being able to is diplomacy. And I think diplomacy sometimes gets a bad rap because people wrap it up in political correctness. But I think being able to tell someone tough news or a tough message and not leave them torn apart, is a superpower.
I agree. And I don't know, do you want to give an example of how you use that superpower in work life or personal life?
Yeah. I mean, in my bio, you talked a bit about some of the work I do around equity and diversity and inclusion. And that work can be difficult in a corporate setting, particularly when that's not your core job. But I do think for myself in my career, I've always made it a point to drive for change in organizations. Transformation is really critical, but transformation can be really hard and it can be jarring for people. So the tactic I've taken is try to find what influences that individual, what do they care about, and how do we bring that into the dialogue around change. And so when I talk about diplomacy, I have been able to, prior to the awakening of 2020, I've been able to talk to executives about white supremacy as an example, in ways that bring them along instead of have them running for the hills.
I think what you just said, I have two thoughts on that. Mm-hmm. One is, I love that you said it's your superpower, even though the word diplomacy sometimes gets a bad rap.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're owning it regardless, right? So I think that's really good because sometimes people would think, oh, is there a better word that I can use to spin it so that it doesn't, turn people off? And then I like how you really are able, we're talking about a superpower. That is very powerful. Mm-hmm. Being able to talk about white supremacy in corporate spaces. I'll be quite honest for myself. working in healthcare spaces, white supremacy is a really tough topic. So I'm like, that is a superpower to be able to do that. I used to kind of bring in white allies even
Yeah.
to speak to it. So I think
Yeah.
that is really cool. So let's go back, because that's a major superpower, and I think it takes a while to really realize that that is your superpower. So if you want to take us back on your journey, and you mentioned you were African born, so let's you mentioned that to me. So let's go way back as far as your journey coming into Canada and becoming this agent of change that you are at TD. So how do we get to here? Let's go back.
Oh, okay. So I was born in Ghana. My family moved here when I was turning 2.
Mm.
And my mom tells a story about, being on the plane with me. And at that time, I loved cocoa. There was this like porridge that she would make. And
Okay.
she knew that this would be her saving grace on the trip. So she brought it with her. But by the time, and the Ghana trip is from Accra to Amsterdam, Amsterdam to Toronto. By the time we get to Amsterdam, the cocoa is finished.
Uh-oh.
So she's like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do with this child? So we're on the flight now from Amsterdam to Toronto, and I'm screaming and crying for this cocoa. But at some point in all of that, I've been pacing up and down the aisles of the airplane. At some point, I turned to her and I just tap her on her shoulder, and I'm like, Mom, give me the cocoa. So I stopped the screaming, stopped the wailing, and just tried to like break it down for her in pieces so she could understand. And so whenever my parents are talking about my diplomacy, they say that it started very young, just trying to find different ways of saying the same thing, or coming at the message in different ways to help the audience understand it. And so, I always laugh at that, but it is essentially what I continue to try to do, is try to not understand, like, I have an understanding of a particular issue, but I want to try to understand the way the other person understands it.
Yes.
And come at it from that perspective.
I love that, because I think that's a key piece that's required for mediation. And we know, at least I know on my end, so I'm half Nigerian. In Nigeria's history, women played a huge role using that type of diplomacy in the decolonization process. Of course, I mean, there was violence, there was protest, but that kind of mediation and negotiation, a lot of Nigerian women played that role historically. And so you were able to do that, or to try that on the plane at 2 years old with your mom. What was your journey like in elementary school and high school in Canada? Obviously, you grew up, here for the most part. So there's, the full racialization process kind of happens in a way that, you know what I mean, is from young compared to somebody who immigrates when they're older. But sometimes we lose or forget our superpowers in these spaces. But did you feel like you were able to harness that and be aware of your superpowers in the Canadian classroom context? Or did you have to take a detour for a while?
I'm so glad you mentioned your Nigerian heritage, because I think about that in the context of my Ghanaian heritage as well. And I look at, warriors like Nana Asantewa, who negotiated with those who were trying to colonize. And I think we have that spirit within us. And it stays with us through school. So in my context, certainly through grade school, I remember running a business in grade 6. And the teacher being really open. I mean, we just made these little power puffs that we would create, and I started making them. And
what's a power puff?
It's like made of yarn, and you make these cute faces on them, and the kids just seem to take to them. Okay. So I remember people liking it. I had made one, brought one to school. People were like, "Oh, can you make one for me?" And I was like, "Oh, I'll teach you how to make it, and then you can be in the store with me." And then we can run this business together. Wow. And so even at that time, being able to say, okay, you're going to do this part of the job, you're going to do this part of the job. And when there were conflicts, being the person who was going to mediate. So just that, so see, like, you're making me think about this, and I haven't thought about it in this way, but looking at these past points, it's been very interesting. I think the big awakening point for me was going to university. So through grade school and through high school, I was in very, very diverse communities. My high school likely would have had a population that was, say, 8% white.
Wait, and then, what?
Yeah.
I was expecting 8% black. Wait.
Yeah, no,
Sorry.
8% white.
Okay, so because we have international listeners as well. So
Yeah,
in Canada, black people we're about like 3% of the general population in Canada, but when you narrow it down to Toronto, around 9% now.
yeah.
Not necessarily back in the day. So to be 8% white, that's interesting. That's a
Hmm.
unique neighborhood
Yeah,
in is the GTA. So
yeah.
what kind of neighborhood are we talking about then?
Yes. So I grew up in Rexdale, which
Uh-huh.
is in the Greater Toronto area, the northern sort of western part of the Greater Toronto area.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a mixed income area, but it's very known for its lower income
Mm-hmm.
neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the high school I went to was extremely diverse, people from all over the world. And as I said, a very small white population. When I went to university
Mm.
at Guelph. It was the absolute inverse. So I
Yeah.
went to university,
If
began
you're
in,
lucky to get 8% of black people there, but go on, go on. I
and
don't
I,
know.
and you know what? It was not even 8% black. It was definitely not 8% black because I can tell you, I started school. I started university in the biological sciences, and I remember being in lecture halls of 1,000 people, and there being two black people in the room, and we would always find each other. You'd be like, oh yeah, yeah, hi,
Wow.
and then you'd wave across the aisle to
Is
this
that
black person.
0.1%? Yeah,
That's about
0.1%.
0.1%. So when I
Yeah.
say inverse, I am not quite accurate there.
Okay.
but
Yes.
but it's interesting how going into that space,
Mm.
you negotiate your identity in a very different way. When
Yes.
you are black among a lot of black people,
Hmm.
there's sometimes a pressure to perform a particular kind of blackness.
Yes. I know what you're
and
talking
and
about.
then
Yes.
and then when you're black amongst very few black people, for me, my experience, of course, there was the isolation, there was the racism, there was all of those things that created some mental health challenges for me. But there was also the opportunity to try different performances of blackness.
Mm.
And
Do you want
so,
to elaborate on that?
yeah,
Different.
yeah. Because so
Mm.
so and I know the use of the term performance could be taken in a particular way. So I want to be careful and open that up. When I say performance, all I mean is the way you show up. So, for
Okay.
example, for me, at that time, I mean, it was the mid late '90s. Hip hop was at its apex from my perspective,
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm.
there was a particular aesthetic that was hot,
Right.
and and there was also like other aesthetics. There was the head wraps, and there was the more neo soul kind of vibe
Yes,
that wasn't
girl.
as big in my high school. But
Uh,
when I went to university, it was an opportunity for me to really embrace that. It was an opportunity for me to
mm-hmm.
embrace things that I might not have felt as comfortable embracing, only because
Mm.
there was no blackness to sort of um, assimilate into.
Yes, yes. So you could define, blackness. No matter what, you're going to stand out as the black
No,
person in the room.
exactly,
So you could show up however you chose to show up.
exactly.
Um, and so there is evidence, and sometimes it does break my heart in the way that when I think about parents who either sometimes come from a lower income neighborhood and
Hmm.
move, into white suburbs. So that was my experience as a child, right? Going from a very mixed neighborhood to a very white neighborhood at the age of 6 and
Hmm.
experiencing racism in that situation, being the only. And,
Hmm.
my mom talks about how, I was 6 years old and she would come check on me at night. And I used to sleep with my kindergarten picture under my pillow, like my old school, because I used to cry at night,
Oh, missing everyone.
missing everyone because I was experiencing a lot of isolation.
Hmm.
Um, and you describe going from a very mixed neighborhood, but doing this in university. But there's evidence that when either because that was the decision you made, so you make it for yourself or you make
Hmm.
it for your children, wanting upward mobility. There's a special stress that comes from being the only,
Oh
right?
yes. Oh yes.
And it is isolating, and it can be actually detrimental to mental health, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So there's lots of studies on this, work done by Dr. Kwame McKenzie and others
Hmm.
in Canada and in the UK. But
Hmm.
what was that like for you? Because you did
Mm.
mention mental health. So
Oh
can we kind
yeah.
of pause and talk about what that
Absolutely.
culture shock would have been like in being the
Oh,
only at University of Guelph.
yeah, it was a massive culture shock. So let me just take a step back. The reason I ended up going to Guelph was because of a Black recruiter.
Oh,
So what happened? What had happened was
right.
my
What happened?
I remember
Right.
I wanted to go into sports medicine. My guidance counselor said there's a great program at Guelph. It was at the time where they were introducing university degree plus college diploma, that combination. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember I was like, oh, Guelph, what's that? I had no interest. And she said, there's a recruiter coming. Just go by and see him at lunchtime. And I had no intention of going, but I happened to walk by the room and turned and I said, oh my gosh, it's a Black guy. Let me go and
Mm,
see what he has to say.
right.
I was the only person who showed up. And so he and I, his name is Julian Gordon. He became one of my great mentors in university.
Oh,
He and I ended up having this great conversation, and then I put in my application. And
wow.
he was very real with me. He told me what it would be like as a Black person.
Okay.
And but I don't think that anything that he said to me could have prepared me for what I felt.
Nothing can. Nothing
Like
can.
it
Mm-hmm.
was deep isolation. Like I said, anytime you saw a Black person on campus, you ran towards them.
Wow.
And some of those people are still friends today. But I remember that first weekend after, parents dropped me off and settled in my room, I got on the Greyhound and I came back to Toronto. Like
Oh,
it was that type of sadness. And that sort of sadness that stems from isolation, it continued through my first and second year. And I think what I have to also offer to this context is I came out of high school top of my class, student
mm-hmm.
council president for 2 years in a row, all the awards, all of that. Go to
Nice.
university, they tell you expect your marks to drop by 20%.
Yeah.
My marks dropped by like 40%.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm not surprised. That's stress.
this was devastating to me. And I think the stress of the isolation and the expectation that I had placed on myself
Yes.
combined resulted in me not seeking help. I didn't
Mm.
think that I didn't want to be that Black person who couldn't succeed in university.
Pause. Naki is describing a horrible emotional cocktail for Black university students. Too often, it goes unrecognized. I call it the triple threat of isolation, identity crisis, and stereotype threat. So, issue number 1 is isolation stress, which is due to racism. Being the quote-unquote only Black person or minority in any environment for a prolonged period of time can be stress-inducing. Even if everyone is nice, which often is not necessarily the case, but even if everyone is nice, it's stressful. Oftentimes, these students feel like they are representing all Black people. And so they enter a classroom and they experience hypervisibility, meaning if they do something wrong, it is noticed, and invisibility if they're actually doing well. Then there's the second part, identity crisis, which can actually happen to anybody who is, used to being a top performer and getting straight A's and then going to university and seeing their grades plummet. And then finally, number 3, stereotype threat, which is when the people from a minority group are stressed about the possibility that they will actually confirm the stereotype about their own group. So in this case, Naki was worried about the stereotype that Black people have inferior intelligence. So the idea is to work really hard to prove that you're smart. But countless studies have shown that having that nagging stress and doubt about a stereotype can result in even worse academic performance. So it's like you're working so hard to prove that you're better or equal that you actually do worse because of the anxiety that it causes. So you take that triple threat cocktail and then wash it down with some shame and some silence, and that student will spiral downward. And Naki was no exception. Now, the antidote, of course, is talking about it with people you trust, getting help, and overcoming the shame. But we will get into that a little bit later.
Okay, folks, coming up next, we're about to have a difficult discussion about mental health. Naki opens up about a very personal experience with depression and suicide. If this is a hard or traumatizing topic for you, please skip ahead by about 7 minutes and restart the podcast at 27 minutes and 7 seconds on the timeline.
I think the stress of the isolation and the expectation that I had placed on myself,
Yes.
combined, resulted in me not seeking help. I didn't think that I didn't want to be that Black person who couldn't succeed in university.
Stereotype threat, right? It's like we feel like we have to overcome all these stereotypes, but then actually we get worse and perform worse because of the stress of trying to overcome the stereotype. So you're at University of Guelph. You are experiencing stereotype threat, but you don't know it. So you've got all of this stress, you're underperforming, and it's impacting your mental health. And you said you didn't seek resources, right? Yeah. So I mean, what was that like? And I guess, how did you overcome that? But what was it like when you're in that moment? You were a straight A student, and now you're, I guess, getting C's, or you know what I mean, or D's. I don't know, but it's a drop. It's a drop. Yeah.
Massive drop. I'm a high performer. My parents have all those expectations, and as a child of at least one African parent, I think you know what this is like.
Oh yes,
and Caribbean parents as well. So you know what this is like, and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that I couldn't do it, because everything that I had tried up to that point, I had been successful at. And so I'd get the exam marker, I'd get the assignment back, and it would just be D's, then turn to F's. And I remember walking to one of these resource centers and like just not getting the sense that this is a place for me. Like the photographs, the staff, like just nothing in there said this is a space where they're going to understand you.
Yep, I've been there.
And so I just didn't do it. And I remember falling into a depression that led to very serious suicidal thoughts and then a suicide attempt.
Really?
That attempt occurred after I was required to withdraw from school. And I remember thinking, how am I going to tell my parents this? I can't believe this is happening to me. I have peers, because we had, the few Black students that were there. We all tried to study together. We all worked hard to try to help each other succeed, and it just was not happening for me. And I could not believe it. And so I'm required to withdraw. I have this suicide attempt. I just remember waking up in the hospital, my parents standing over me, and my dad and my mom had brought this card, and it talked about how failure is an event. It's not who you are. And I remember my dad specifically saying to me that the part of me wishes that you failed more. So that you would have known that it's not the end of the world. And I take that lesson so seriously now. Like, and even with my the teams that I lead, I want people to fail early, because I don't want people to be devastated by failure and internalize it as who they are. It's an event. It's an event. It's not a status. It's not an identity. And that's what I learned out of that experience. Now, I think what's pretty amazing about all of this is I decided to, in the time period that I was required to withdraw, I began a radio show at Guelph. I started a hip hop conference.
Hey.
I switched majors into sociology with a marketing minor. And, fast forward 20 years, I'm on the board of governors at Guelph. And part of my mission is to ensure that we're creating spaces where Black students and other racialized students feel like they can go in, get that support, get the resources they need to sur-thrive.
To sur-thrive. Girl, I have goosebumps, right? Because on the board of Guelph, the place where you're saying that you experienced, an episode of failure, right? Which was really just for you to learn and as you said, sur-thrive and overcome and do that much better. But for many of us, like you just said, we internalize the failure. And I think it's so powerful that your parents were able to really see you and be there for you. And I think that's what we need to do for each other.
100%.
And yes, anybody who's Nigerian listening, you see, we have to learn from the Ghanaian parents here. Although, do you know Nigerian parents? Everything is like, hey, I beg, don't disgrace us. So everything is becoming a useless, all this nonsense. But you internalize that stuff, right?
Of course.
And so to have the wisdom to tell you, yeah, no, this is part of that journey. And you just, you fall forward and you keep moving and you keep thriving. So, oh my goodness, I'm so grateful. Number one, that you shared that story, but number two, that things could have ended for you in a very different way. But you are just taking all of that. You stood up and just created not only a path for yourself, but a path for so many others. It's so powerful, Naki. It's so powerful.
Thank you for that. And I have to shout out my roommate who heard me fall and woke up out of her deep slumber, because she sleeps deep. She somehow woke up out of her deep slumber and called the ambulance and got me to the hospital. She saved my life, no question. And then the other shout out, when I returned to Guelph to do my master's degree, and I remember thinking, I'm going there, I'm going to have a redemptive experience of nothing like my undergrad. I'm going to come and do something different here. And I remember two things. One, in that first year, having a bit of almost like a PTSD experience of, oh no, this same isolation, I can't do this. But the change for me was I reached out to people right away. I remember writing to Cecil Foster, who ultimately became my advisor, and saying, African-born student needs help. That was the subject line. And, had a conversation with him. He became my advisor. I also became the head of the Black Students Association at what was the equivalent of the Black Students Association at Guelph. So there were just things that I did differently to create a different experience for myself.
Pause. It is amazing how when we let go of shame and listen to our inner wisdom, we can intuitively gravitate towards healing solutions. Naki sought the support of Black peers when she went to Guelph University for the second time and felt the doom and gloom re-entering her mind. We now know that peer support can improve mental health. According to Valeria Chambers, the founder of Black Voices, a well-known peer support organization in the United States, she says, and I quote, "Having a place where you can truly be understood among those who get you, your culture, and your needs is priceless." End quote. And I agree.
So there were just things that I did differently to create a different experience for myself.
So reaching out for help, that's so important. Reaching out to mentors, it could be mental health support, and peers, right? You're talking about becoming part of that Black Student Association and playing a role there. People don't realize the immense well-being that comes from peer support, peer mentorship at all levels.
Absolutely.
And I mean, now you're at next levels. So, your role in TD is really about being an agent of change. And again, I guess we need to tap into that diplomacy superpower that you have, because, it's hard to be involved in equity, diversity, inclusion, even if it's not those titles, but, addressing issues of diversity, addressing issues of anti-Black racism or white supremacy in corporate spaces. And we have like a quote here from the Toronto Star with you saying, quote, we wouldn't have seen society's reckoning with anti-Black racism without the leaders protesting in the streets, and we won't see systems change without leaders inside of institutions using their networks, resources, and influence to build a more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable future. It's not only huge that is what you think, but it's also huge that you're willing to say it to the Toronto Star, because some of us do those things, but don't say it out loud people know the recipe for what you're using, right? So where does that come from? What, you know what I mean? How does that happen?
And why I felt it important to say that was because at that moment in time when that interview was done, there was this dialogue about the effectiveness of protesting. And so the people were like, oh no, you need corporations to stand up. You need governments to do things. And I was like, yeah, that's true too. But we also need people in the streets to protest, and we need all of these different channels. And working in corporate Canada, I often say, sometimes things will happen and people will complain about something. People will complain about the role of corporations, or people will have a negative experience with, say, a financial institution, and they'll go public with it. Obviously, when that happens and you're inside the bank that has happened, it hits you in so many ways. Like, it hits you from the perspective of, I'm so embarrassed. Like, you have that feeling of embarrassment. It hits you from the perspective of, oh man, we're trying so hard and still this has happened. You get angry, you get frustrated. But at the end of the day, it's helpful. It's helpful that this person who has had this experience has raised their voice and has given you a jumping off point for a new set of discussions inside the organization. So I always like to say, if you will, like the outside and the inside need to work together.
Yes. Girl, we're on the same wavelength. That's exactly, because you need that public accountability.
Absolutely.
Folks on the outside need to hold the institutions accountable, because when you're on the inside, even if you're trying to create that change, it's very difficult. Now, for you, what has been your approach? Because, when trying to deal with issues of oppression and change, and, we could speak to TD specifically, or you can speak to other spaces. It doesn't have to be that. It's up to you. But what I have observed is that when we want to be, the lone voice or part of a committee, creating that kind of disruption for positive change, you're kind of shaking the building. And when you're on the inside, it's a whole calculation of, how does this whole building not fall on my head? If you're pushing for these things, it's not going to help you with your advancement. And people think of advancement as selfish, but no, the higher you are in the institution, the more influence you have. So you're always kind of juggling this thing of, if I keep quiet, I can move ahead. If I move ahead, maybe I can have more impact. But then when do I stop being silent? So how have you reckoned with that, that act, that dance?
It's quite a dance. That's a really good term. I think so a couple of things I'll say about that. The first is, similar to my experience in university, in the corporate setting, having a community is critical, because if you're doing this type of work, you can't be by yourself. When you mentioned the building falling on your head, that might happen, but it will be easier for you to take if you've got other people beside you. And so I would never claim to be doing this work at the bank or in any of the organizations I've been in by myself. And people have often said to me, but what if inside your institution there aren't other Black people or other people who are working towards this type of equity? I still think that even if you can build a community outside that's designed to help support you in the work that you're doing inside, that can still be effective. But I think that the notion of community is absolutely critical, because sometimes you'll say something like that quote that you just read, or an internal podcast that I did. I remember, you do these things and you think to yourself, oh man, what did I just do?
Yes, I know that feeling.
Oh man, like, okay. Just waiting for that call from my boss that says, hey, we need to have a conversation. But then you can just call one of your people and say, listen, this is what's, even before in a lot of cases, before I do the interview, I'll say, this is what I'm thinking, and just be able to bounce the ideas around and have them say, yeah, you could go this far. If you go this far, this might happen. Like, just to have that support is really, really critical. And the other thing that I often say is, and this is probably not going to be a popular opinion, but you got to be good at your job, like your actual job.
Yeah.
To be effective in equity work, you got to make sure that your day job, your pay job, you're on point on there. And I'm not saying that if you are struggling at work, you should be quiet on equity stuff. But but I do think that it's important to demonstrate that we're not just out here doing one thing. Like I want my peers and the people above me to know that I'm excellent, period.
Yes.
And I'm going to challenge the organization on this, this, and this.
Yes.
While I'm challenging the organization on equity issues, I will also challenge the organization on customer experience generally. I'll challenge the organization on accessibility. Like I think if the more we can show ourselves to be excellent at our jobs and to be equity seeking in multiple dimensions, I feel we can be more effective overall.
I would agree with that. I think some folks will say, well, we shouldn't have to be. So
I get that.
It's like we shouldn't have to work 10 times as hard. I agree. But that's the reality. Then you decide, as Kika Ojo Thompson said, you need to know the game board you're playing on.
Exactly.
So as long as you are aware of the game board, you understand the game board, then it's up to you how you want to play it. You might say, you know what, I want to live my best life. I'm not going to outperform and be excellent, and I'm just going to speak truth to power. That's cool, as long as you realize what that means, what the implications are. For many of us, it's to be excellent and then to, be a leader, right? So when one is leading a team in anything, you have to walk your talk. And so that is one of excellence if you're leading. And then, folks will come hopefully and follow for that change. It's harder to be a leader of change if you're not, leading in multiple areas or showing, excellence or demonstrating that in multiple areas. But I understand that some people decide not to go that path, but I think we all need to be clear on the game board, the lack of meritocracy and all of that as far as how things work, and then decide how we want to play. And the way that you play, you're making impact, girl. So
well, and thank you for that, first of all, Dr. O. But I think the other piece, and I think it's an important message to convey, because I know this sounds like it's going into the realm of respectability politics, and I want to be careful not to suggest that that's what I'm saying. Right. I think the striving is the more important part, because I will even say, as I moved into my new job, I have not been as excellent as I would like to be. It hasn't stopped me from doing the equity work, but the understanding is that I continue to strive to be excellent, even though I might not get there every time and might not get there right away. The aspiration continues.
Pause. Okay, so Naki just mentioned a term, respectability politics, and I think we should probably explore that. So in the context of African American history, respectability politics was practiced as a way of attempting to assimilate into white society and abandon any behaviors that would be frowned upon by dominant white culture. This is still done today. So basically it means behaving in a manner that white people would respect so as to gain acceptance and social status. This is not what I was talking about when I was mentioning working really hard and being excellent. I'm talking about being a leader. So Naki is a leader, and she is leading change in an organization. Whether you are a South African warrior like Shaka Zulu or a civil rights activist and professor like Angela Davis, you have to be excellent at what you do to lead change. So this is not about gaining status by adhering to colonial standards of respectability. In fact, that kind of self-imposed assimilation has been shown to be detrimental to Black health. I'm talking about leaders who need to be excellent, not perfect, but excellent, effective at leading change within any group. So obviously this is nuanced when you are in a work setting where the white gaze is ever present, but nonetheless, I'm speaking about the excellence of leaders, and Naki is excellent at what she does.
The Race, Health, and Happiness podcast will be right back after these short messages. Yeah.
The Race, Health, and Happiness podcast is produced with the support of Toronto Metropolitan University. We are proud to be partnered with TMU, a school that has committed itself to addressing its colonial past, doing its anti-racism work, and moving forward with a mandate to provide an equitable and inclusive learning environment.
I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. And there's more to come. This podcast is made possible by our sponsors and partners, but we need your help too. We have set up a Patreon account, and the funds go towards supporting our students, specifically Black journalism students who work very hard on this podcast, and we make it a point to pay them. The link is patreon.com/RaceHealth&Happy, and you can also find it in the show notes. And check us out on Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Our handle is @RaceHealth&Happy.
And now back to the Race, Health, and Happiness podcast.
The understanding is that I continue to strive to be excellent, even though I might not get there every time and might not get there right away. The aspiration continues.
You're doing your best work, right? That's it. It's just doing your best. And with that, do you want to just talk a little bit about the role that you hold now? Because let's read. So, because I'm coming from medicine, right? So where I read Vice President of Strategy, Colleague Experience, and Environmental Social Governance, it's not terribly clear to me, girl.
I know. And it's so long. Every day I wake up and say, how can I shorten this job title? Okay. So
what do you do?
Yes. So let me back it up for a second. So I came to the bank. I remember I had a strategy session with girlfriends about what next job, what would be interesting next job. So I remember saying I would love to do corporate citizenship at TD.
Okay.
3 months later, I get a call from a recruiter saying, "Hey, we'd love for you to come interview for this new job that we're putting together." And I thought, wow, this is incredible. 7 months later, tons of interviews. 7 months later, I get the job. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I'm here to do this job at TD because I'm not a banker. I'm here to do this job at TD and then I'm out.
Okay.
The TD environment is one where development and conversations about what's next are very frequent. And so I remember in about year 3, began to have those conversations. And I thought with my skill set, like my background is primarily public sector and not-for-profit, I didn't see a lot of pathways. But I had a great conversation with a couple of executives. One of them did say that I should think about the transference of some of these skills. And that led to the role that I'm in now, which is focused on strategy for our our consumer-facing business. So how do we make strides to improve the customer experience, to deepen customer relationships, and so on? But it also focuses on how do employees experience work. So you can't have a great customer experience if the employee experience isn't great.
Right.
So I've got both of those in my portfolio, both the customer and the employee experience, and within that is well-being and communication and so on. And then the third piece is what's sort of short form called ESG. So that's essentially the ways in which a business uses its business to drive better environmental outcomes, better social outcomes, and better outcomes in terms of its governance. Okay. So I've got those three buckets as my portfolio.
Those are some big buckets, girl, but all the power to you.
Thank you.
Because I was reading it and I thought like it was shortened to ESG, and I was like, I don't know what that is. So then I had to. And then I read it, and I was like, I still don't know what that is. So thank you. But that's really, again, like powerful as an agent of change. Now, my understanding is when you first came to TD, you were part of helping to design and implement the TD Ready commitment. Now, yes. I'd like to hear a little bit about those, early years with that work, because on the like on the back end. So with those of us who are not on the inside, I mean, for a few years, there had just been this buzz, right? Like about a Black leader who worked at TD and she seemed committed to like our empowerment. And we'd hear about, news events like the Black Diamond Ball and partnerships with Harborfront and initiatives in our communities. We hear about all these things and your name kept coming up, right? Like it would be like Naki. And, I just said to a friend or a colleague, like, I'm interviewing Naki, and they're like, yeah, Naki is good peeps. Naki is good. You know what I mean? Like that
really
echo, it's like that, when you drop the pebble and it goes, foo, 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 you know what I mean? that kind of impact that you have. And so I know you're all about that, but it's really cool that you've worked with TD to have this ready commitment. Do you want to talk about how it came to be or what your role was in that program?
Yeah, I've been lucky in my career to arrive at organizations when they're starting things. And so I came to TD when they really wanted to revamp the way that they do work in community. And the leader at the time, a woman named Andrea Barrick, who I really I consider her a friend, and I consider her leadership really vital in all of this. We worked together to identify, okay, so what is inhibiting inclusion? Oftentimes in the corporate environment, we talk about inclusion as though it's a given, and we'd have to just do one or two little things to make it happen. But we took the approach of thinking about this from the perspective of, okay, if inclusion is what we want to see, what's inhibiting it right now? And if we look at because there's a lot of things that are inhibiting it, if we look at all the things that are inhibiting it, in what areas could the bank actually have an impact through its investment in community?
And what year was this actually? Because this is like what corporations are asking themselves now.
Yeah.
Clearly wasn't now. So what year?
This is 2017.
2017. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then go ahead.
And so we looked at, financial security. So if people do not feel financially secure, if they don't feel financially confident in their futures, it's hard to experience inclusion. If we think about health and health and wellness and access to healthcare, experiences in healthcare, again, those impact our inclusion. If we think about housing affordability, housing access, again, same. And then the last area was around connection to community. So having connection to community, doing things to combat xenophobia, all of these things are areas that we felt, amongst a huge list, but these were 4 areas we felt as a bank we could make investments in and actually see positive outcomes. Recognizing, of course, that this is a ongoing process, right? Like this is not that the bank's going to come in, do a few things, and then we're going to have an inclusive society that's perfect. But can we begin to affect change? Can we begin to help build foundations for change? And that was the intent.
I think that's very powerful for a bank to be doing that work and for you to be, like part of that process. And since that time, do you feel like TD Ready commitment has, made an impact in working with communities?
My response to that is based on what I hear from community members who have said, TD was the first organization that supported us. Like, you believed in us, you saw a vision. I think the other thing that is really important here is we have people on that team who are entrenched in community in their lives. It's not just their jobs, right?
Nice.
So,
okay.
and so when, myself or others, when we go out, people see us, they find us, they say, hey, this is what I'm working on. Is there a way for this to work with TD? And we become an access point to help individuals navigate what can be a very complicated system. And I think as a result of those relationships, we've been able to have impact in deeper ways. The last thing I'll say is, when we developed the Ready Commitment, we took the organization through a mindset shift, which was, we're not going to be looking for outputs. In the past, you'd have a festival, you sponsor a festival. How many people attended the festival? Like, what's the demographic population? All that stuff. Mm-hmm. We were shifting from outputs to outcomes. So what is the outcome of this investment? Recognizing that change can sometimes take a long time to have an outcome. Yes. And so in a lot of the investments we made, we moved from 1-year funding relationships to multi-year funding relationships, so that that outcome can be measured over time. So I think those shifts and changes that we implemented have made an impact. if I can say one more thing, I know that I said that was going to be my last point, but the last thing I'll actually say is
All good.
the other thing I think we did well was bringing in partners as experts for the organization. So we have these great funding relationships, which creates which can create a bit of a paternalistic relationship if you're not careful. The big corporation funding the small not-for-profit. But if you can find ways to recognize and acknowledge that this not-for-profit organization or charity has expertise that the bank can also benefit from, I think then you create a more balanced relationship, and that's something that we've been striving for with the TD Ready Commitment work for some time now as well.
Pause. I'm so glad that Naki brought up the importance of seeking non-conventional forms of expertise and knowledge. Often, we are taught that only certain forms of knowledge, such as literary works, randomized controlled trials, and the perspectives of those with a large collection of university degrees, are the only legitimate forms of knowledge, or are superior because they are most valued by white Western societies. So other forms of knowledge, like the wisdom of elders, community narratives, experiential knowledge, tend to be undervalued. And this is actually a form of racism called epistemic racism, which I learned about a decade ago, thanks to my Indigenous colleague, Dr. Janet Smiley. Shout out to her. So epistemic racism is the positioning of knowledge of one racial group as superior to another, including a judgment of not only which knowledge is considered valuable, but which knowledge is actually considered to be knowledge. This is a form of colonial violence because it devalues and silences many forms of traditional knowledge in other cultures. According to Dr. Ghanian-born, psychologist and author of the book Living While Black, she says, colonialism distorted our sense of self, and we've come to internalize white colonizers' gaze and racist constructions. When we internalize the colonizer's gaze, the result can be self-contempt, disdain, scorn, or shame. So, none of those are healthy. I would propose that we practice the reverse, which is more healthy and liberating. So being open and exploring other forms of knowledge and expertise beyond the colonial standard, which is what Naki and her team at TD are doing.
The other thing I think we did well was bringing in partners as experts for the organization. So we have these great funding relationships, which can create a bit of a paternalistic relationship if you're not careful. The big corporation funding the small not-for-profit. But if you can find ways to recognize and acknowledge that this not-for-profit organization or charity has expertise that the bank can also benefit from, I think then you create a more balanced relationship, and that's something that we've been striving for with the TD Ready Commitment work for some time now as well.
I love that you said that. That's something that we're striving for in medicine as well, to bring in community experts who have been on the ground and to, teach our students and who have different identities, but, are not, MD, but have so much to say about how to mobilize and how to change health outcomes in our community and different communities. So I love that, I never imagined that, TD in the corporate world were doing that as well, to be honest. So I think that is awesome. Now I have a question for you as you do this work. So for many of us who do this type of work within organizations, we see the change happening, but at the same time, these are still organizations, we're working in colonial institutions. We're working in institutions that were built for generally for white men by white men. So while you were doing all of this work, creating leadership and career development and, all of these different pieces and the community piece or again, it doesn't have to be specifically at TD, but where you're working, trying to be an agent of change, were you also experiencing exclusion and racial challenges yourself in some of these corporate spaces?
Oh, of course. I mean, they're all the things that you would have heard from others, I'm sure. Being the leader of the team, but being thought, people mistaking me or assuming that I would be the EA coming in. Having folks hear about some of the work I'm doing and being sort of patronizing about it. Oh, well, that's a nice thing we can do, and I'll support you if it doesn't make my life harder.
Wow.
It's those kinds of things, and those are things that I've experienced in all my career. And again, this is where that community and that network of support becomes so important, because sometimes you'll hear a comment, or you'll hear some kind of patronizing remark, and it can deflate you so much so that you lose all energy and motivation in the cause. But having people who can then say, yeah, I'm gonna let's keep going, let's try this, let's do that, let's do something different is really helpful. And I'm sorry, I don't remember where I was going with that, but what was the gist of your question again?
Oh no, just if you have
I experienced it?
Yeah, while you're working to create the change, you're also, you know what I mean, experiencing the same phenomenon you're working to address. You mentioned in that the importance of like peer support and looking for colleagues. Now, you were awarded as one of 100 of Canada's most powerful women on WXN. So that's the Women's Executive Network. You are in a number of different circles of powerful women or women of color. Are you noticing that women of color are supporting one another individually or also community-wise through philanthropy? Are you seeing that here in Toronto? Sometimes we see it in the United States, but I'm not sure if it's happening here in Canada as much.
I have been the beneficiary of it, so I would definitely say yes, I'm seeing it. We can do more, 100%, and it's something that I continue to challenge myself to do more of. But I remember when I got the WXN award, a colleague of mine at TD and Ketchi, Nwafa Robinson, she got it the same year. And we spurred each other on. Like we celebrated together. We posted each other's wins on our pages. Like there was just this wonderful mutuality. And one of the things that I'm telling all these TD secrets, but I'm going to give you one more. One of the things that we do at TD that I love, and this was I point to a colleague, Colleen Ward, on this. She does this a lot, where we just celebrate each other. So if somebody is recognized, or someone gets a promotion, or someone has something special happen in their life, Colleen or Nkechi or someone will send an email out to the other Black executives to say, this has happened in our family. Let's celebrate this person. And that support is just, even if there are people on that list that you don't know that write to you and say, I'm so happy for you, I'm cheering you on. It's just it's so refreshing. In a place and in a society where competition can feel so close and so tight and aggressive, it's really wonderful to have people just celebrate and cheer you on.
Yes, girl. And I think that is so important. We need to celebrate ourselves, celebrate each other. And yeah, we do have a listserv like that at U of T. So we do have the Black faculty listserv. So it's always like, congratulations.
Yeah.
Like, and yeah, oftentimes it's people, I mean, it's U of T, it's huge. There's people that I don't know, but it's being part of that village, right? Feeling a sense of belonging. Now for young women, Black, BIPOC, other marginalized groups, but let's kind of maybe center in on Black, since that's the experience we both carry. For young women who are trying to advance in the business world, do you have any advice on how to thrive?
Learn your business. Like really understand, how does your business work? If this is a money-making enterprise, how do they make money? How do you have impact? Like understand that, because And this is in part why I moved into a completely different part of the bank, coming out of corporate citizenship and moving into Canadian personal banking, is I wanted to be able to make impact directly in the business. But you can't do that until you understand the business. And even when you're doing, like if I go back to my corporate citizenship days, one of the things that we would always try to do is understand how our work impacts the business, how it benefits the business, so that we can use those levers. So understand your business so that you can use those levers to affect change. That would be my first piece of it, of my first suggestion. My second is something that I've said throughout this interview: build your network of support. I think that there's a really big focus on sponsorship, especially in the corporate world. We talk a lot about sponsorship, get senior people to understand your skills and talk about you when you're not in the room. Not saying don't do that, but don't only do that.
Right.
Like make sure that you have peers who will also speak about you when you're not in the room, because sometimes the peer voice can be just as weighty as the senior executive voice. So just, I would say, try to have a balance of the two, and also have people who are junior than you in your network. I think that's important too. It's an opportunity for you to learn what challenges are coming up, what are the things that people are dealing with now, and to have folks give you feedback from a different perspective. I think that's also very useful. The third thing, the last thing I would offer is, as much as it's scary to do, and sometimes we think about how it could affect our career, I do think it's important to take risks. It goes back to the comment you made, and you referenced Kika Ojo-Thompson and the game board. When you understand the game board, it allows you to take risks in a more calculated way. And I think that it's important to do that, whether it's, I'm going to take the risk and speak out in this meeting, or I'm going to take the risk and pursue a job that maybe I don't think I'm 100% qualified for, or I'm going to take the risk and put my hand up for that international transfer opportunity. Take the risk.
Yeah, no, I think that's really cool. And thinking about, because I think, actually, I was going to say when we're younger, but actually I think it gets worse as we get older, and because the list grows longer of reasons not to take that risk. But yeah, especially as you said, if it's calculated, like you understand the game board that you're playing on, then that's actually what can help significantly advance you. And if it doesn't, then like we talked about, you fall forward, that it doesn't define you.
Exactly.
And you overcome and you thrive. Now, speaking about, or thinking about, younger folks coming up, I know your most recent role is at the Rotman School of Business. And so do you want to just let our listeners know, what is an executive in residence at Rotman? What do you do?
I'm still learning. It's a very interesting way for the School of Management to connect with leaders from across different communities. So obviously, with any school, as you very well know, there's all kinds of faculty. But then I think in the case of Rotman, the interest is in ensuring that the students have access to industry leaders as well. And the opportunity for me was, my big focus area is around equity and leadership. And so what I'm hoping to do through this executive in residence opportunity is to really emphasize that through guest speaking opportunities, through mentorship with students, through some programs that I'm hoping to initiate with the school, really just bring that focus. And I appreciate that Rotman sees that as an important focus and have invited me to serve in this way.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. We also talk about that in medicine, right? Like the need for understanding equity in leadership, because when it's not there, there's significant consequences, right?
Absolutely.
So I think it's so cool what you're doing. We'll have to talk offline. Maybe we can collaborate.
I would love that.
Yeah,
I would love that.
And shout out to Numan Ashraf, because he's EDI at Rotman, and so he was a guest on our show as well. But yeah, so I know you know him as well.
I thank you for raising Numan, because he is a force of change as well, and was quite instrumental in me getting this appointment. So shout out to Numan. He is the real deal.
Shout out to Numan. All right, so you've given us actually a lot of tips on how to advance and overall how to thrive, which part of that is staying well and making sure we have our peer support and all of those pieces. But then I always think it's so important for us to dive even deeper into like the happiness piece and the joy piece and hashtag Black Joy. So Naki, what brings you joy?
Oh gosh. I always say that, like, I am at my absolute happiest when I'm dancing. I suffer from migraines, but I could have a migraine and you put some music on and I will dance still through the migraine.
That's serious.
It is my absolute joy. Yeah. And I try to do it at least once a day.
I love that. And that's actually what I do. I don't think there's a day that goes by that I don't dance. And it is my joy. I mean, we're West African sisters, right? So
absolutely.
Yes.
So it's a necessity. The other thing that I do that brings me joy is I love to write. I'm an avid journaler. I have probably 30 journals right now, over the last several years.
Wow.
It's a really important way for me to process my thoughts, for me to people talk a lot about journaling for the purposes of gratitude, and it is helpful. I mean, I have had some tough times in the last several years, and in those tough moments I've gone back to my journals and it has brought me joy. They have brought me joy. Reading entries, whether they were sad or happy, they bring me joy.
Oh, that is fantastic. And so I think with that, again, you have given us so many gifts, so many pearls of wisdom here. So I thank you, Naki, for joining us. Is there anything else that you want to let our listeners know about?
Yeah, the one thing I wanted to say is, we've talked a lot about my approach in the corporate world, which has been to speak up and to take risks and to challenge the status quo. That's one approach. That may not be the approach for everyone that's listening. And I want to make sure people feel like people have an understanding that it is okay. If your strategy is that you want to be quiet and you want to collect experiences, and then, at some particular point you're going to do something different, that's your strategy. If you have a different approach, that's your strategy. I think that's fine. The only thing I would say is, if you're not the person who wants to be the voice, support the people who are. Find ways to support those who are, because when those people are acting as a voice, your support is the thing that could keep them going. Your support is the thing that could continue to encourage them to do the work. And the things that they are doing will likely have some benefit on those who are even the quiet ones. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, no, I think everybody in the village has their role to play.
Yeah.
We're most protected as a village. And yes, absolutely. People play different roles. And sometimes silent supporter is okay. Sometimes just showing up at work some days is resistance. But where we can, then let us support each other for the change that needs to happen so that we can all benefit.
Exactly.
Absolutely. I love it. Thank you, Naki.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
The Race, Health, and Happiness podcast was created by Dr.Onye, and she's our host. The show is produced, edited, and engineered by yours truly, Dr. Carl Cabasel. Our technical producer is Obadiah George. Our showrunner is Cam, and JL Joseph is associate producer. Promotions coordinator is Jordan Gibson. Social media coordinator is Efwa Mfojo. And Javiera Violeta Duran Quieres is our logistics coordinator. Awit Siem is our business manager, and Tamika E. Latibaudiere is our research consultant. Additional support from Latoya Powell, our special production consultant, and additional voice work by Darrell Carpentier. The RHH theme song is composed and performed by Gold Keys, and graphic design is by Veronica Ng. Do you have questions, feedback, ideas to share? We would love to hear from you. You can connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at RaceHealth&Happy, and check out the show notes for research that was referenced in this episode, as well as other bonus material. Our website is RaceHealth&Happiness.com. Thank you for listening to Race, Health, and Happiness, and please subscribe to us anywhere you get your favorite podcasts. I'm Dr. Carl Cabasel, and we'll talk with you soon.
The Race, Health and Happiness podcast is brought to you with help from Toronto Metropolitan University and with support from subscribers and listeners like you. Overcome the obstacles of racism while staying happy and healthy. Donate today at patreon.com/RaceHealth&Happy. We are learning together to sur-thrive. Thank you for your support. The Race, Health and Happiness podcast is made better by the skills, knowledge, and creative passion of the journalism students who work right here on the show. These students join us from Toronto Metropolitan University. Thank you for the hard work, folks. We appreciate you.